Hey friends, welcome to History Savvy. Today I'm going to be looking at two different newsreels from World War II, one German and one American. Both newsreels cover the subject of the Normandy invasion in June 1944. So what I want to do here is compare and contrast the ways in which the Germans and the Americans portrayed or presented the Normandy invasion to their respective general publics. So the first newsreel I'm going to look at is the German one from the Wochenschau. And because it's in German, obviously, I am going to be doing some very basic translation. I don't want to translate word for word because I think that would be rather tedious to watch. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
An der Invasionsfront.
On the invasion front.
Schwere Granaten werden für den Transport nach vorn verladen. Die erbitterten Kämpfe an den Brennpunkten dieser Front bestätigen immer wieder, dass auch der pausenlose Einsatz der angloamerikanischen Luftwaffe unseren Frontnachschub wohl erschweren, nicht aber unterbinden kann. Unter der ständigen Gefahr, von Bombern und Tieffliegern angegriffen zu werden, vollbringen die deutschen Nachschubfahrer hervorragende Leistungen.
So as you can see, we're looking at some camouflaged convoy trucks bringing things like grenades and artillery shells to the front. But what the narrator also says is that these convoys face constant attacks from the Anglo-American air forces from the air. And even though that these attacks make it more difficult to get things to the front, the Germans are not to be beaten. And that these particular men are accomplishing remarkable work in the face of great adversity. Now that's interesting because in a sense, we can learn that the Germans do not have control of the air at this time. Hence the reason for having a difficult time getting supplies to the trucks or to the fronts. But what we're seeing here is the Germans sort of softly twisting the narrative to put on a good face in a bad situation to show that even though they're having a rough go of it, the Germans are not to be beaten and they're getting the job done nevertheless.
Ein Feindverband ist durch den Luftspäher gemeldet.
So some enemy planes have been spotted.
Doch die Bomber greifen K an, die Stadt, in der tagelang eine Schlacht von unvorstellbarer Härte tobt. Rücksichtslos vernichtet dabei die angloamerikanische Luftwaffe Stadtteil auf Stadtteil, wobei Tausende von Franzosen ihr Leben lassen mussten. K ist die Brandfackel der Normandie geworden.
So the bombers are on their way to attack the city of Caen, which is undergoing a very, very fierce battle. He says Caen has become the burning torch of Normandy, and that thousands of French people have lost their lives in the course of this very hard battle.
Deutscher Nachschub rollt nachts durch die noch brennenden Vorstadtstraßen.
So he's saying that German supply trucks are driving through the night, through burning cities or the burning town, to bring supplies to the front. You can see him eating a sandwich.
K am Morgen nach einem der schweren Bombenangriffe.
So the city, the morning after a very hard
Infanteristen
bombing.
beziehen am Stadtrand neue Stellungen.
Infantrymen taking new positions in the city.
Das Panorama der heimgesuchten Stadt.
panorama of the destroyed city.
Unsere Infanteristen in der Bereitstellung zu einem Gegenstoß. Ihre Gesichter spiegeln den entbehrungsreichen, harten Kampf dieser letzten Tage wider. Es sind dieselben Männer, von denen England sagt, dass sie imstande wären, bis zum letzten Atemhauch zu kämpfen.
So those were infantrymen who were preparing for a counterattack, and their faces revealed the hard nature of the battle in the last few days, and that these are the men that Britain said that they would fight to the last breath.
Panzer und Sturmgeschütze rollen zu einem Gegenstoß nach vorn. Den Panzern folgen unmittelbar die schnellen und wendigen Munitionswagen.
So he's saying the tanks are rolling in for a counterattack, but he also says Munitionswagen. So it's either these, I'm not sure what this is exactly, or it's these trucks are bringing the munitions in. But notice what they're doing here is they are cutting out all of the spaces between the trucks. So it looks like there's a long, quick convoy of trucks and tanks and things moving towards the front. So you get a sense of a really quick paced and efficient battle going on here.
Infanterie auf dem Marsch. In enger Kameradschaft mit Kameraden der Fallschirmjäger und Waffen-SS leisten diese Kämpfer einen Widerstand, den unverhohlen die ganze Welt unserer Gegner bewundert.
So it says these are infantrymen who are working in close coordination with members of the paratroopers as well as the Waffen-SS, who are doing a great job of fighting back and are basically doing remarkable work world over. That's a paratrooper. You can tell by the way his helmet is.
Fallschirmjäger gehen vor.
Paratroopers are moving ahead.
Eine vom Feind eingesehene Straße wird genommen. Artilleriefeuer auf den Hohlweg.
Taking a street when they come under heavy artillery fire.
Eng an den Boden gepresst liegen die Männer in Deckung.
It says they're laying thick on the ground in cover.
Stundenlang dauert das Trommelfeuer an, das unsere Männer vernichten soll.
So the barrage lasts hours.
Sturmartillerie auf Selbstfahrerfette leitet einen Gegenstoß der Deutschen ein.
So these storm artillery leads a counterattack.
Amerikanische Sherman-Panzer brechen in ein von Infanteristen und Fallschirmjägern gehaltenes Dorf ein.
It says American Panzer tanks or American Sherman tanks storm into a city that's held by infantrymen, German infantry.
Ein deutscher Kriegsberichter filmt den Panzereinbruch aus unmittelbarer Nähe.
It says a German war film correspondent films the action at close up.
Rechts und links sind unsere Männer ausgewichen. Der erste ist durch.
First one's through.
Eine Gruppe der Fallschirmjäger verfolgt den Kampfwagen, um ihn mit Panzernahbekämpfungsmitteln zu erledigen.
So a group of paratroopers follow closely the tank to destroy it.
Panzerschreck und Panzerfaust werden eingesetzt.
They're using
Auf knapp 10 Meter rollt der zweite Sherman vorbei. Sekunden später machen ihn einige Schüsse aus der Panzerfaust kampfunfähig.
So a tank passes within 10 meters, and shortly thereafter, a hit from, I think it was a Panzerfaust, knocks it out.
Der 3. und 4. Panzer fahren demselben Schicksal entgegen.
A 3rd and 4th tank all received the same fate.
Auch der Goliath bewährt sich bei diesem Einbruch. Durch ihn wird ein 5. Panzer noch vor Erreichen der Ortschaft in die Luft gejagt.
So that is a little clip of a basically remote-controlled explosive tank called the Goliath. It was controlled remotely via cables, and its whole purpose was to go out and explode tanks. So apparently that is an example of a Goliath going out and destroying an American tank, although I really couldn't see an American tank, to be honest.
Das Gros der amerikanischen Panzerabteilung dreht damit ab.
So the American tank, basically the American tanks decide to pull back at this point.
Fallschirmjäger unmittelbar vor dem Nahkampf mit amerikanischer Infanterie.
So German paratroopers are in close combat with Americans.
Hat einen schwer verwundeten Amerikaner gefunden.
Found a very badly wounded American.
Ihre Schützenlöcher sind schon geräumt.
Their foxholes are cleared.
Aus den Büschen werden nach kurzem Gefecht die Gefangenen herausgeholt.
After a short battle, the prisoners are taken in.
Verwundete auf dem Wege zum Verbandplatz.
Wounded are on their way to being bandaged. So scenes of American prisoners here.
Gefangene aus dem USA-Rassenschmelztiegel.
So he just said prisoners from the American racial melting pot. That's a good. So that's very, very interesting. Clearly, they're relying on the German racial propaganda that says they are racially better than everybody else, and implying that Americans have muddied their blood through mixing with other races.
Verwundet und angeschlagen schleppen sie sich in die Lager. Sie haben erkannt, dass der Widerstand der Deutschen von einer unverrückbaren Stärke ist und dass dieser Widerstand nicht nachlässt, sondern von Tag zu wachsen scheint.
So it says the Americans wounded are schlepping into a camp, a prisoner of war camp, having realized that the German resistance to their invasion is strong and appears to be growing stronger from day to day.
Die Gedanken so mancher dieser Männer mögen oft drüben in England sein, das seit Wochen fast pausenlos mit Groß-London und dem Raum Südenglands unter dem Feuer von V1 liegt.
So the thoughts of these men are probably or maybe on England, where for the past few weeks where the people have lived for the past few weeks in constant fear. Fear and threats.
Englands Südküste durch die Fernkamera gesehen.
So the south coast of England through a big binocular.
Das ist V1 im Einsatz. Die unerwartete deutsche Waffe, die eine erste Antwort der deutschen Luftrüstung auf den angloamerikanischen Bombenterror ist. Unter den orgelnden, unheimlichen Tönen von V1 leben London und die angegriffenen Teile Südenglands in ständiger Furcht und Nervosität einer ungewissen Zukunft entgegen.
So he says this is the V1 in action. It's a response to the terrorist bombers of the Anglo-American Air Forces, and through its enormous noise, has instilled fear and uncertainty in the hearts of Londoners and those living in southern England. Now, a little more context to the V1. The V1 had been around for a few years, but it had never really gone into serious action until June 1944, and thousands were launched over the course of the next year. They were launched from bases in the Netherlands, in France, obviously here as well. They were propelled by a pulse jet engine. So this is an engine, it's a jet engine that doesn't run constantly, but it just constantly, it pulses. So the wings were made of wood and the body was made of steel. It operated on a gyroscope system to help guide it. Gyroscopes and magnets is how it basically flew itself. It could also be communicated with via radio, and the Germans used radio communications to get an estimate of where the bomb actually dropped in the UK. So that's the end of the German newsreel. Let's pop over and see an American one.
The most powerful invasion air force ever launched. Some of the 11,000 planes that opened the path through the so-called impregnable Atlantic Wall. Between Le Havre and Cherbourg in Normandy, the Allied lightning strikes. Communications necessary to the German defenses are blasted.
So these films that were taken from aircraft, I find highly compelling. It's such a unique view, and it's so action packed and feels so gritty and real to me. Like I said, I find these sections of film highly compelling. That was one heck of an explosion. See that again.
And now, back in England, a 50-mile-long air train gets underway. Yank paratroopers receive last-minute instructions before taking off for the invasion coast 100 miles across the English Channel. These are the heroes who established first contact with the enemy. As the transports take off, General Brereton wishes them Godspeed.
These short clips here remind me of the opening scene of the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, and I wonder if that was if this newsreel film inspired those particular shots.
Another set of brave men board gliders. Zebra stripings mark all Allied aircraft as invasion equipment. And at another English field, one of the many from which the terrific Allied power set out, British troops are glider-borne to the flaming coast of France. Backing up the mightiest invasion by air, 4,000 ships, combat and landing craft carry the war to the enemy by sea. The Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Forces land hundreds of thousands of British, Canadians, and Yanks on Hitler's doorstep within a few days. Isolating Cherbourg with its strategic harbor is the immediate objective. Landings are made under a naval barrage. President Roosevelt said, "Let our hearts be stout." And later, Germany is the first on the list for destruction. These troops, bucking the choppy seas in the Channel, heeded his words. While landings were successful, we were not without our losses.
So that is a unique bit of honesty in a newsreel. If you'll remember, the German newsreel didn't admit to any losses at all. The most that they overtly admit to is wounded men, not dead men, or that their forces were fighting against difficult resistance from the air, from the English-American Air Forces. So this is, I think, a big difference between the American and German newsreel, admitting to losses.
Shock troops move in for the beach assault. The most gigantic armada in history. Each hour, and the enemy's hedgehog defenses are ahead. This is the supreme moment of invasion. This is frontal assault on an entrenched enemy.
So what you just saw is what I think is probably one of the most famous pieces of film to come out of World War II, and also one of the most famous pieces of film to come out of the 20th century as well. That scene of men assaulting the beach in Normandy and one of them falls dead. Again, not something you would see in the German newsreel.
Heroic medical corpsmen remove wounded for return to England. Some landing craft are stranded on sandbars, and a tank founders. The first batch of Nazi prisoners, the Supermen who believed their West Wall impregnable, and a Frenchman to whom the stars and stripes spell liberty. He's waited a long time for this.
So this is the Frenchman here, but it looks like he's around a lot of, that my guy's maybe an American, but the other guy was definitely British.
What he says wouldn't pass the censor.
He just chucked down a German helmet.
Nazi wounded get the same care as Allied soldiers.
Yet another difference that we can see between the American and German newsreel is the German newsreel did talk about American or Allied wounded, but it didn't say anything about the kind of care they received. Just that they had been defeated and they kind of went to the prisoner of war camp accepting of their inferiority and their defeat.
During the landings, the merciless pounding of the entire invasion area continues. is real pinpoint bombing. One of the last bridges between the invasion coast and Paris gets it. When the beachhead is established, heavier equipment is moved in. Reinforcements for those heroes who are bringing liberation to the people of Europe. The cost of our initial landing was but a fraction of what our leaders expected.
Again, here is the American newsreel acknowledging there's a human cost to the battle here.
More than 10,000 German prisoners were captured in the first few days of the battle. And we know one Hun who's not going to peddle any more Nazi philosophy.
So they're not shaming the German prisoners. They are just saying now they're außer Gefecht. They've been neutralized in a sense, and they're not able to peddle their ideology anymore.
The Allied advance is rapid as we mop up town after town. Those not seriously wounded are questioned on the spot by their captors. The Allies bagged plenty of equipment from the surprised Germans. Many of the enemy troops didn't know what hit them, and the cooperation of the French aided our cause. Some Yank will have a nice doormat when he gets back home. The Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower, holds an early conference with General Montgomery, the commander of English ground troops, and they see that all operations go according to plan. These are the men who will lead us to victory, along with General Omar Bradley with glasses, who commands our infantry. The cost of our first landing was low, but many wounded are returned to English ports, men injured in that first assault. Let these pictures remind us that there's still a long road ahead to Berlin. The bond you buy in this fifth war loan drive can help men like these on the path to victory. Now it's your turn. Buy that extra bond today.
So, on the subject of war bonds existed in Germany in World War I, but not World War II. The German government was afraid of a soft referendum by the people against the Nazi government by failing to put up their own money in favor of the German war effort. So I find that an interesting, little talked about fact of the war. So let's talk about the differences between the American and German newsreels. The first and perhaps biggest difference is the fact that the Americans were willing to acknowledge human loss in the Battle of Normandy. The most the Germans were willing to admit to was that some of their men were wounded. The next difference I noticed was the American use of humor. If you remember the scene where the soldiers, the paratroopers, were holding up the Nazi flag and the narrator said somebody's going to have a nice new doormat when they got home, that bit of humor is something you would never see, or you didn't see, in the Nazi newsreel. The Nazi newsreel was always to the point. The narrator was very quick and hard in his language, and there was no room for humor, which kind of plays into a German stereotype. The other difference I noticed is the Americans used what I would call real film. They used film that was captured during the course of the battle, whether that was on the beach, on the ships, from aircraft. It was all real film. The Germans used real film mixed with fake film. Now, what do I mean by fake film? I mean that Germans recreated scenes for the sake of moving the story along or showing the public this is how it happened. Now, if you remember the scene where the Germans were loading the trucks up with artillery shells to take the front, they were driving down the road, and then they had to jump out of the truck to protect themselves from a possible air attack. The loading of the truck may have actually been real, but the scene where they, like the German says, "Halt," and they got out of the truck, that was all recreated at a later point. It might not even have been in Normandy. So that's an example of the German newsreel using fake film. Now, I'm not saying Americans didn't do this, but at least in this example, the Americans didn't do it. So if you see any other really prominent differences between the two, please feel free to put that down in the comment section. Let's start a discussion about it. I'd really like to hear other people's ideas. So with that, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.